Hello.
There you go.
All right. I'm sorry we seem to have been muted just now. We're just going to I'm just going to backtrack a little because I think that most of you could not hear me just now. I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that. I apologize. We will just go back through the introduction, and we'll be going through the current the organization of today's discussion. So today we'll be introducing open data. We'll be looking at the current knowledge on evaluation of open data. The reason that we've decided to start off with this topic is that this is perhaps the most important area of research that was identified in our preliminary survey of partners back in the summer of 2012. Our municipal partners told us about their own projects and how they were getting feedback for them, but everyone actually acknowledged that the current measures on evaluation are not quite enough. So we decided to start off our webinar series on this topic to raise some issues for members of the project and give everyone something to think about. We will then move on to just a framework for use for evaluation, and we'll also be raising some problems with evaluation at the end. Finally, we will hopefully have a little discussion period where you can post comments, questions, and we will be looking at them and trying to respond to them. We will also be trying to present some, if you don't have any questions, we will also be trying to present some questions of our own that we want you to think about. So moving on. So we'd just like to give a little background on open data for the.
So we're going to be giving a little bit of background on some of the reasons for open data. Open data. Okay, sorry, there's a couple curveballs being thrown at us. So we're going over some of the reasons for open data. Open data comes from a mixture of open government, government 2.0, open source movements, as well as technological advancements. There's been a big push for governments to open up their data to become more transparent, as in line with a number of those initiatives. So a definition of open data from opendefinition.org is a piece of data or content is open if anyone is free to use, reuse, and redistribute it, subject only at most to the requirements to attribute and or share alike. So this definition is very good, and it shows that data is being used for open government. It's claimed to bring more transparency, but it's not necessarily the open data, but rather the content that open data has within it that increases transparency. There are a number of different reasons for open data, and although some of them are very strong, we're still dubious about others. For example, the transparency issue. Does open data really increase government's transparency, or is it just a stepping stone towards overall government transparency?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'd also like to note that the World Bank has a nice way of defining open data as well, where they split their definition into two sections, where they talk about the the technical openness of data and the legal openness of data. But so let's just so moving on to the next slide. What do we actually hope for from open data? This is the big thing that everybody has been talking about and has been a big part of rhetoric from a variety of stakeholders. So let's just broadly set the scene and go through what people generally hope what open data will bring us. So the first bullet point refers to government in terms of increasing transparency, accountability, and even efficiency. The second bullet point, citizen empowerment, this can involve a more educated public, for example, that can allow them to access and thus analyze data. It can also allow them to have increased awareness and reaction to public issues, and therefore participate in such issues. And this could in turn lead to actions such as voting in the democratic system, which increases democratic participation. Business empowerment is relatively similar. Businesses, for example, could use open data to potentially increase their efficiency, produce better products, and generally benefit financially from it. And of course, this is going to lead to economic growth, hopefully. And finally, hopefully, all of this results in more interaction with our governments, better feedback loops, and as previously mentioned, more democratic participation. There are more subcategories, of course. Groups such as the Open Knowledge Foundation, this is a very big group in open data, have their own lists of reasons why we need open data. There's a link at the bottom of the slide as an example. And these are all potential benefits we could have from open data. And as we know, it is increasingly becoming part of the rhetoric from proponents of open data, which is exactly why we need to know if any of these are actually going to become the case. To start off along that path, we need to think about what actual current metrics there are out there in terms of measuring and evaluating open data. So currently there are, well, I'd just like to start off by noting that we're actually talking about evaluating open data right now. We're not discussing openness of a data set. So we're not actually discussing whether or not a piece of, we're not trying to evaluate whether or not a piece of data is open in, for example, in a municipal open data portal, how open it is, and whether it fulfills certain criteria. I think we're actually past most of those issues, and most people tend to have the same idea of what open data actually is. So what we're focusing on right now is on how to evaluate everything else, how to evaluate the effects of data and the externalities of distribution and use of open data. But still, I'd like to note that this is actually what appears to come up a lot more. The rating of a government's openness in the data is a much more popular topic at the moment. So firstly, we have economic valuation of data going on in literature. this is not necessarily open data at all, but it is where data sets are given monetary value, assigned monetary value. So I'd also like to throw in a few potential methods from economics that we could use. Willingness, where we could look at willingness to pay and contingent valuation. These tend to be attained through survey methods. And we also have, we've had instances of a value actually being placed on software that comes out of open data as well. Our second bullet point, evaluating public sector information. This is the main area where economic valuation of data appears to be coming from. And we have two big examples from the EU. These are two big studies commissioned by the European Commission, and they have been used as part of the justification for their own open data initiatives. Both of them have, the first one looked at data usage and tried to estimate users estimate the market size by calculating reusers. And the second one also tried to estimate market size by calculating what the current income from data for example, environmental data, which is one of the most popular categories of data, how much that income created, and trying to extrapolate that to the rest of the economy. So these are quite broad, macro level evaluation techniques we have right here. So we have a number of metrics were identified from these two main studies. We have current income from data. We have turnover rates, which is the turnover in staff involved in public sector information. Next, we have the calculation of market size, as just mentioned. We've also had these studies try to create indices for the supply-side evaluation of transparency and accessibility. It's not quite clear how this was done. And finally, these were all survey-based techniques. They were large sample sizes, but they were still very much survey-based. Finally, we've also had some evaluation in public dialogue and awareness. There's been very little outside of the economic side of evaluating data, but we've had some government reports with questionnaire surveys trying to evaluate public awareness in open data itself. And our example is the third link on this slide from the Office of Public Management in the UK on evaluating public dialogue on open data. So I hope this just gives a very broad overview of what is out there right now and what is being done. That's what those first three main bullet points are what has been found in the literature right now. And as you may note, none of it is actually explicitly on open data. in our preliminary survey in the summer of 2012, we also talked to our partners about their own evaluation techniques, and the broad consensus was that their own evaluation is very limited, but there have been some that try to get feedback from a variety of sources, such as social media and other ways of communicating with their citizens, as well as trying to calculate cost avoidance. Cost avoidance by reducing the number of freedom of information requests. These are the two main methods of evaluating the open data products that they have right now. So moving on to the next slide, we have current problems with evaluation. So as we know, there aren't a lot of metrics out there. So why bother? Well, the effects on open data consumption and distribution will not just be on the economy, but also in governance, we think, such as in the government to citizen and citizen to government relationship. And it is very important to know if the other objectives of open data are also working, because they make up most of the rhetoric on why we should have open data in the first place. Those in government that are providing open data also need to be able to justify what they're doing in order to continue the current course of action, of course. And what we need to be able to do is to get at the uses of data right now. So how to exactly evaluate an open data project? What is considered success? These are questions that have come up right now that we maybe do not quite have the answer to. We know that current metrics are not enough. We know that simply looking at the number of downloads a single data set has and the number of unique visitors an open data catalog has is definitely not enough. We have anecdotes, which our partners have provided us, but it has also been acknowledged that those are also not enough for a rigorous evaluation. People do like numbers. There's a link here there's an interesting link here on the slide that links you to a Open Knowledge Foundation Google Doc where they are actually collating a lot of anecdotes on how open data has improved data quality. These are basically anecdotes on data reuse, but they give you an idea of what the current, what the benefits are, the potential benefits are, and how people are thinking about open data. We also have estimates from the likes of Apps for Democracy on what the total value of apps created in hackathons for open data is, and these are simply estimates, so we have to acknowledge that this is also not quite good enough. The final point that I'd like to raise is how the definition of open data is perhaps a hindrance to evaluating it in the first place. There is perhaps a little conflict in our own desire to monitor data use and reuse, and the fact that open data is meant to be completely open, completely reusable and redistributable at users' discretion. And so it is actually not possible to force users to actually monitor themselves and to report back to the data provider on what their uses are, as this would be limiting the openness of the data we provide. So the take home here is that there's evaluation right now is pretty ad hoc. There are no real standards out there right now, and also that we may have we will have a conflict between remaining open and needing to monitor open data to evaluate its effectiveness in the future. Moving on to...
We're going to take a short break now to answer any questions that people may have based on what Pek's presentation. Okay, so since we don't have any questions at this point in time, we'll be moving on to the next portion of our presentation. So the next portion of our presentation is going to be talking about value. And as Pek
So we have a question on willingness to pay. This is just this is not actually something that I've found to be used in open data itself. But trying to evaluate willingness to pay is simply it's akin to trying to create a demand curve for open data itself. And we could get that by surveying a large sample size and having cases assign their own value and answering questions which would allow us to evaluate how much they're actually willing to pay for a certain piece of data.
Okay, we also have another question from Harrison asking if public sector data is the same thing as open data, and if there's any conceptual differences that we should know about. I think that public sector data and open data, there are some differences, mainly around the license that is involved with that data. Much of public sector data can be used for open data on government agencies that have open data programs. But the main thing with open data is that there is a license associated with it that allows a user to do essentially whatever they want with the data, and the only attribution that needs to be done is that there has to generally say that this data came from this government agency. That's the main difference. Some other public sector data may have other licensing information associated with it, where you may have to be a little bit more careful in how that data is used. Okay? I think that answers all the questions at the moment. Peck, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I'm just waiting to see if there are any more questions that pop up.
Okay. I think that is everything.
All right. If there are any more questions, Matt will, our moderator, will actually interrupt us. Could interrupt us if it relates to the previous section. Or you can save those questions for the end as well.
Yeah, we'll also be answering questions again at the end, so you can hold on to your questions or just ask them in the comment section, and Matt will make sure that we answer them. So we're moving on to the next area, which is talking about value and how we could evaluate open data. So evaluating open data is a lot more complicated than you might initially think. So a framework has been developed, or is being developed, to make sure that we look at every aspect of open data. As Peck had previously mentioned, a lot of the value that are evaluating open data is coming from this economic side of things. But we need to make sure that we're really looking at open data from not just an economic perspective, but from a wide range. Because most of the economic value that's currently being looked at is anecdotal economic value, and it only really reflects the potential commercialization of apps that could be developed. So we've broken it down into 4 different types of value. So first of all, there is the economic value, which is leveraging open data does create economic value, both in the creation of an application with value through either the purchase price of the application or advertising sales associated with that application, and the employment of various developers or other people that are going to be working on creating this application, keeping it up and running, and making sure that the public at large is able to use it. So at the bottom of the slide, there's a link to a site assessing the value of OS open data to the economy of Great Britain, which was a study done by Carpenter and Watts this past year. And they've shown that the economic value of open data the potential is huge, and it has a lot of potential to greatly improve the economy, mostly as a result of net productivity gains in the government data ecosystem. For example, both the government and the private sector will obtain economic value from the form of being readily available, resulting in cost avoidance in obtaining data. They do have a lot of numbers associated with this study saying how many hundreds of thousands of dollars that open data will save the government over the next couple of years. However, they do not give any insight into the methods that are used. So again, it's anecdotal because we don't really have any insight into how this was actually calculated. The next area of value is operational and technical. So a big disadvantage of keeping data closed is the potential for duplication of efforts to recreate the same data. For example, if the government already has X data set created and another company would like to use this data set to either create an application or do a survey or use it in some sort of way, and this data is not available from the government, they would either have to find a way to pay for this data or create it themselves. And if they create it themselves, there is a strong possibility that the data recreated could potentially be different, have some differences from the government's data set based on how the data is collected or not. So open data really counteracts this unnecessary duplication and allows for organizational time and effort to be maximized, especially for government employees that may have to fill out freedom of information requests. Open data allows those employees to use their time on other projects that might be more important or require higher expertise than have to worry about filling out these freedom of information requests. The next category of value is organizational. So organizational value is a new form of, a new category that we've created that is the value experienced from the collection, cleaning, and release of open data. And this is specific to governments. Basically, many governments are not even sure what data that they have. So in order to put as much data on their open data program as possible, they need to find out what data they do have and also clean that data and make it a little bit more user-friendly. So this is not only beneficial to the public, it's really beneficial to the government itself, because the better data quality that they have, or the better understanding that they know what data they have, that is of great value to the government itself. And the last category of value that we have on here is political and social value. So political value is derived from open data, and some examples are increased government transparency, democratic accountability, increased trust in government. And as previously mentioned, open data is often said to promote government transparency. However, we need to make the distinction that it's the content of open data that really increases transparency and not just the open data program itself. And so a lot of governments use open data to potentially improve services and use innovative solutions that can be created from open data to help maximize their citizens' enjoyment. So the social value is about maximizing the impact of public expenditure on societal benefits. So this includes citizens' happiness, well-being, health, inclusion, and empowerment. So this can be this value can be as simple as a citizen being able to use an application that has been created from open data that makes their daily life just a little bit easier. That is of a big value to citizens, and it is a social value. For example, a lot of applications have been created using open data that allow on a smartphone to see when the next bus is coming in real time. So if it's raining one day and a citizen doesn't have to go stand out in the rain if the bus is going to be half an hour late, that makes their lives a little bit easier, or they can make the choice to find a different method of transportation. So the take home is that we really need to evaluate other types of data, other types of value, as well as economic. There's a lot more to open data than just the economics of it. And if those different categories aren't captured, we're not getting the whole picture of how open data is valuable to a number of different stakeholders. So moving on to the next slide, we have an image, which is the framework for evaluating open data. And this is done as a pyramid. So you can see on each level in the boxes are the different stakeholder groups that would experience this type of value. And at the bottom of the pyramid is economic value, because this is the foundational value of open data. at some point there will always be lead towards economic value. It is a huge portion of open data. As you move up towards the top of the pyramid, less and less stakeholders benefit from each type of value. But if you start from the top of the framework and move down, as the arrow indicates, the value increases as you move down the pyramid. But in between each level of value, a transformation of the data could potentially occur. For example, the value from organizational value was that the government itself had to collect, clean, and release this data. And so there's nothing being done with the data at this point except being put onto the open data programs website where it's available for others to use. Once you move past this level of value into political or social value, generally something could have been done with the data at this point. Whether that be an application was created or the data was analyzed to help improve services, there is some sort of transformation that occurs. Open data itself, as it sits on a portal, does not generate economic value. Is what something is done with it could generate the other types of value. It does not say that open data on itself, without being used, doesn't have any value. It most certainly does. It's just as something is done with it, the value increases, and once you get to the bottom of the pyramid for economic value, that is where the greatest amount of value could occur. Moving on to some open discussion and some more questions, if we have any.
Well, just before we do that, we had a question about asking whether we could add a slide for each item in the value framework. We can amend the slides. We'll be sending out a summary at the end of the day today to everybody. So we can amend the slides and put more information on them for you. Just to summarize, before the discussion questions, we have open data, we have issues with evaluating open data, we have issues with valuing open data itself, and we'd like you to just keep in mind that it is not just the economic value that we need to look at for open data. And it's definitely not just the economic value that we need to look at in order for it to work. So we have a couple of perhaps provocative questions for the audience. What do we do with issues of tracking derived value and value added? Especially as this pertains to the definition of open data that we discussed earlier. And what do we do in terms of scale? Geographers are quite interested in scale, and how would things change when there are different scales of stakeholders, for example? And what would happen when perhaps private sector gets involved in open data as well? We have a question about the pyramid, Stephanie?
Yes. So geographic scale is definitely something to think about. At this point, when I was developing the pyramid, I was including, for example, tourists in the citizen stakeholder group. As my research moves forward, I will definitely be expanding upon those 4 groups to try to include as many different people as possible. So try and see exactly what stakeholders do benefit from open data, and not just those 4 broad categories that were mentioned. This is definitely a starting point, and more research needs to be done to move this agenda forward.
Yes, we also have a comment from Tab. Yes, NGOs as well. NGOs are a big proponent of open data, and they will still be a big player, big stakeholder in the future.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. As I did mention, this was a starting point for getting the research moving forward. As it does move forward, these 4 groups will definitely be expanded on, and NGOs will be included. Do we have any other questions at the moment?
This is the end for now. We're just going to be waiting for any questions that may come in. So we have a comment here on tracking value. So the comment is that tracking value could be done if data is streamed from government. And we need to think of open data as static, but it doesn't need to be. Yes, data could be streamed from government. The only issue would be the actual, whether this method of streaming would be technically open or not. And it still does not address the issue of added value down the chain.
Yes, I think we want to get at the fact that there is value obviously beyond the download, and once something is done, once it's downloaded and something is done with that, as more transformations of that data occurs, there still is value from open data, even if the data has been changed by different developers or other private sector people or even citizens. There is a change in value. So I think that's, yeah. And so we have another comment that tracking derived value may be no less difficult than checking internal value.
It's still a case of reporting back to the distributor of open data, I would say, and having a system that enforces reporting back is either going to possibly infringe on the definition of open data, or it's going to be perhaps technically unfeasible for especially small governments to handle.
Obviously, if we were able to track once the data has been downloaded, what's done with it, and if data is only downloaded once, but it is turned into something that is used by hundreds of thousands of people, this is great, but it is the definition, I think, of open data itself that causes the hindrance to that. So obviously more research needs to be done in this area.
Okay, first we have another comment. How will we share the outcome of this activity? If you could comment clarifying do you mean the this current discussion we're having right now? If that is what you're referring to, we will be sending a summary out to you.
Okay. We have another comment saying there's also the problem with evaluation of the impacts of combined data sets. So yes, this is another difficult area to evaluate, so that once 2 open data sets could be combined to create something that is extremely valuable, and it may not, that again will be difficult to capture. So there are a lot of issues or complications surrounding evaluating open data. So this is a first step, and we definitely need. There are lots of questions left to be answered. We have another comment from Andrew Martin saying, "Why do you say that economic value is the greatest form of value for open data?" This was said because there is a great potential, there is a great economic potential for open data. In the link in the slides to the study done by Carpenter and Watts in Europe, they showed that there is hundreds of thousands of dollars that can be saved in a cost avoidance structure for various companies as well as the government. So this is obviously of a great value. And I would say that it might not be the greatest form of value, but it is the foundational value of open data. Because if an application is developed, there is obviously a great number of social or political value associated with that application, but those developers are probably looking for some form of economic value to come back to them as well, whether it be in the purchase price of the application or advertising sales. So the greatest form of value could not technically be economic value, but it is the foundational value, as generally many people are looking for an economic feedback from open data in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
We have a clarification on the earlier question, Pat, saying that how we share the outcome of that activity would be feedback to open data providers.
So the outcome of this current discussion, if that is the case, then we already have ongoing discussion with our municipal partners. From academia, of course, we publish, and that eventually gets fed back into the government system. That information gets fed back to the government.
I know we're a little bit lag behind, but is there any? Do you have any other questions or? Oh. Can you give us some examples?
Yes. Can you give us some examples of the major players or organizations, especially from the private sector, who are pushing for open data? I can think of a very big player right now that is providing software called Socrata, and this is a software company that provides a solution for managing open data and integrating it with government services. These guys have had governments contract their services in both Canada and the U.S. Most of the U.S. seems to be buying the Socrata product. So there is actual economic. There's an actual economic benefit right now being gained from a private sector organization. We also have organizations such as the Open Knowledge Foundation, which is a big. It's a partly a lobbying group. It's an NGO, and has been involved in trying to define open data by bringing together a consortium of public, private, and academic figures.
There are also organizations such as Open North, based out of Montreal, that are really pushing for more open data. They've started different applications online where you can check on your government representatives, and they're obviously looking for more and more data to be opened up as well.
We also have a comment that about Google, yes, Google is one of the big players in open source, I would say. Not quite open data yet, but they did develop the general transit feed standard to allow Google Maps to display bus times. These are examples of indirect, I would say, indirect involvement in open data.
As well as Microsoft and IBM, as Renee has pointed out, have developed open data platforms, which are being heavily used by other people in the private sector and in government.
Mm-hmm.
And the other comment here about Google developing GTFS, so that governments would use Google Maps to display bus times, is also another example of using open data, because most governments now publish their transit data in GTFS format, so it can be easily integrated.
The initial reasons for opening up data formats like this may not have been open data, but we can link these to these efforts towards advancing the cause of open data.
Yes, so are there any other questions or comments at the moment? Okay. I'm glad that we could answer your question, Harrison. At the moment, do we have any other questions or comments that you would like us to address?
All right, I think that's it. I think we can wrap up. I hope, well, first of all, we'll apologize again for the delays. This is our first time hosting this webinar on Google Hangouts. Hopefully, future webinars will run more smoothly.
We'd like to thank you for attending and for all of your very helpful questions and comments. They definitely provide a lot of insight that will help us towards future research.
So today we've just tried to present the main ideas and some discussion around evaluating open data. I hope that's helped you to get an understanding of what exactly is going on out there. But if you have any further questions or would like to talk to us again, you can contact us at geothink.ca@gmail.com. That is the email for the Geothink project.
As well, we will also be sending out, you will make some changes to these slides to add a little bit more information to them and send those out to you by the end of the day today. So again, thank you for attending this webinar, and we look forward to doing more of these in the future.
Thank you very much.